I Hate the News is the weekly news bulletin from I Hate Politics podcast, a show about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. It's August 12th, 2025. Using the pretext of a crime emergency and fighting off attacks from his own political base over the release of the Jeffrey Epstein files, President Trump on Monday announced the federal takeover of DC's police department and removal of homeless people from the district. Last week, officers from several federal law enforcement agencies had begun patrolling more than just the federal city, and 800 National Guardsmen are being deployed to the city under the command of the Defense Department. Montgomery County Executive Mark Elrich invited two Vanderbilt University law professors to strengthen his hands against the City Council's new law to ease zoning restrictions. Penn State entomologist and plant hopper expert Julie Urban on what to do when you see a lanternfly and what experts are doing, and more. Stay with us.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by the Political Science Program at UMBC Shady Grove, where you'll learn a strong foundation in public policy, pre-law, and international affairs for an impactful career in a number of essential areas. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Howard County, Maryland composer Anna Rubin, who used to teach music at UMBC. The compositions we use in this episode come from her album Povehi. Michal Schmidt on cello and fixed media, and spoken word from Maryland beekeepers Carolyn and Jeff Crooks. President Donald Trump, who has been trying to fight off cover-up accusations from his own political base over the non-release of the Jeffrey Epstein files, on Monday proclaimed a crime emergency in Washington, D.C. and unleashed a federal takeover of the city police department in signature Trump style.
Under the authorities vested in me as the President of the United States, I'm officially invoking Section 740 of the District of Columbia Home Rule Act and placing the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department under direct federal control. In addition, I'm deploying the National Guard to help reestablish law, order, and public safety in Washington, D.C., and they're going to be allowed to do their job properly. The murder rate in Washington today is higher than that of Bogota, Colombia, Mexico City, some of the places that you hear about as being the worst places on earth. The number of car thefts has doubled over the past 5 years, and the number of carjackings has more than tripled. Murders in 2023 reached the highest rate probably ever. They say 25 years. Our capital city has been overtaken by violent gangs and bloodthirsty criminals, roving mobs of wild youth, drugged out maniacs and homeless people, and we're getting rid of the slums too. We have slums here. We're getting rid of them. I know it's not politically correct. You'll say, oh, so terrible. No, we're getting rid of the slums where they live. This dire public safety crisis stems directly from the abject failures of the city's local leadership. The radical left city council adopted no cash bail. I was told today, sir, they want more police. I heard a number, 3,500 police. That's a lot of police. 3,500. I thought they were going to say we only have 30 policemen. Last week, my administration surged 500 federal agents into the district, including from the FBI, ATF, DEA, Park Police, the U.S. Marshal Service, the Secret Service, and the Department of Homeland Security.
After Trump said his piece, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser called her own press conference where she tried to walk a narrow path between protest at the erosion of the city's home rule, but also cognizant of the fact that home rule in the city was limited and the president could, by law, do what he wanted, including determining the definition of emergency.
The president's view of DC is shaped by his COVID era experience during his first term. And it is true that we experienced a crime spike post-COVID. But we worked quickly to put laws in place and tactics that got violent offenders off our streets and gave our police officers more tools, which is why we have seen a huge decrease in crime. This year, crime isn't just down from 2023, it's also down from 2019, before the pandemic. And we're at a 30-year violent crime low. The president has prerogatives in D.C. unlike anywhere else in the country, including his authority given by our home rule charter to require the mayor, to require me to supply services of the Metropolitan Police Department. Chief Pamela Smith is the chief of the Metropolitan Police Department, and its 3,100 members work under her direction. The Home Rule Charter requires the mayor to provide the services of MPD during special conditions of an emergency, and we will follow the law. Though there's a question about the subjectivity of that declaration. We will work with the federal government to do the things that they should do for our city, including making sure that we have the judges that we need, including making sure that all federal parks are supported, not just with law enforcement, but with other clean and safe activities, and including making sure that our economy is supported by rational federal actions as it relates to the federal workforce, federal workers, and federal property in the District of Columbia.
After Bowser's press conference, the Washington Informer staff writer, Sam P.K. Collins, joined me from outside the Wilson Building in Washington, D.C. for a debrief.
This executive order will be in effect for 30 days. From what I was told, the D.C. police chief is currently in discussions with the federal government to determine the specifics of that relationship. But there are going to be 800 or so National Guard troops deployed in D.C. Mayor Bowser is very quite clear in saying that this is an intrusion on D.C. sovereignty, on D.C. home rule. At the very same time, she says she's working within the letter of the law to be as collaborative as possible with the Trump administration. MPD Police Chief Pamela A. Smith talked about pretty much leveraging some of the powers that the federal government already has in terms of executing warrants and in terms of just enhancing the patrol of certain parts of the district as it relates to high crime areas and as it relates to nightlife. You know, as we've seen in previous reports, the so-called youth takeovers with youth entering commercial districts at nighttime and engaging in melees and just confrontations with the police. You hear differing tones between the Trump administration and between DC officials. The Trump administration has framed it as a takeover, but the DC officials, Mayor Bowser and Chief Smith, They have framed it a bit more collegial.
The 30-day limit that Mayor Bowser talked about, President Trump did not say anything about 30 days.
Therein lies the conflict because, as we've seen in the past, the president has taken liberty with the law. I do predict that if the president does go beyond that 30 days, there's a possibility of some legal conflict that can come up. The Attorney General for D.C., Brian Schwab, has released a statement just pledging to explore every legal avenue possible to refute what's been going on.
The president also mentioned removing homeless people from the district. How is that going to work? I mean, they're just going to take all the homeless people from and move them where?
President Trump often says things he doesn't think through.
The president also talked about cashless bail. Now, what's going on with that?
He kept saying cashless bail, and I'm thinking to myself during this press conference this morning, what does he mean by that? Because cash bail has been something that hasn't been around in D.C. since the 1990s, at least. He talked about that in the context of other cities. He talked about Chicago. He talked about Baltimore. But D.C., cash bail, that's not really something we have here. Between the Secure D.C. Omnibus Bill and between Peace D.C., judges have discretion in holding violent offenders, and it shows a lack of understanding about the hurdles that are in the hands of the federal government, Trump in particular, to fix as it relates to judicial appointments or the lack thereof. The D.C. jail population has grown astronomically since the passage of Secure D.C. because people who are accused of committing violent crimes are not going home. They don't get a chance to get bailed out.
The basis of the executive order is the view that crime in D.C. is really bad. That's not what is reported, right?
Justice Department released data in January that said violent crime is at a 30-year low. Within the last couple years, since 2023, violent crime has dropped 52%. 2023 was the height of the violent crime epidemic in this city before the passage of the legislation, Secure D.C.
What about property crimes?
Property crime is steady. There's a bit of a reduction. We're talking about less than 5% in the year to date.
What about this belief that gangs of youth it almost seems like a flash mob crime situation?
Chief Smith spoke to that this afternoon. She said it's only a small portion of the youth in the city committing these acts.
Is there an increase in this kind of flash mob crime?
I can't say. I think that's all about perception. It's about social media.
Is there actual crime, or is this just like a bunch of young people behaving badly? They are intimidating, but they are not actually committing crime.
I think it's both. From what I've heard and seen, the difference between youth being youth and youth committing crime is in the eye of the beholder.
The president also talked about statues being brought down, even Lincoln's statue. I've never heard that. Have you heard about that?
No, that was news to me.
The DC Council and Mayor Bowser were fighting with each other over the RFK Stadium project. Has this changed the dynamics of the city's politics such that the mayor and the council now have to cooperate with each other much more?
One particular issue that's going to be very interesting is U.S. Attorney for D.C. Pirro's insistence that the D.C. Council revokes the Incarceration Reduction Amendment Act and the Second Chance Amendment Act, as well as the Youth Rehabilitation Amendment Act. 3 bills that have been pivotal in securing the early release of youth and have been very pivotal in allowing returning citizens to find employment opportunities. Mayor Bowser said today that she is currently entertaining the possibility of drawing up an omnibus bill that would address Pirro's concerns. And I don't see the entire council aligning with that. I do see a fight in the coming weeks and months after the council returns from recess around that legislation. I don't see that being an easy win for the mayor or for Pirro.
Sam Collins, thank you.
Man, thank you. Always a pleasure.
In what could be seen as a barometer of partisan enthusiasm, Montgomery County Board of Elections President David Nyman told a Democratic Breakfast Club meeting that voting registrations in the county are growing fastest among independents and then Republicans. Democrats hold a sizable lead in voter registration with 58% of the voters to 14% for Republicans and 26% for independents. Democratic voter registrations have been sluggish. Montgomery County Executive Mark Elrich has been critical of the County Council's recent zoning law change to allow more dense housing in transit corridors. He has long said that zoning change does not address the central problem of housing affordability that bedevils the county and the nation. Elrich has said that current zoning law allows 70,000 to 80,000 new units to be built in the county, but they are not being built because there is not sufficient demand for them, which he connects to sluggish job growth. To add strength to his claim, he invited two scholars from Vanderbilt University, Chris Serkin and Ganesh Sitaraman, who have recently written an article saying zoning liberalization alone cannot deliver new housing, and the housing market has to be shaped further in order to succeed. Here is Chris Serkin laying out their reasons for the argument.
So there's no real question that there's a housing crisis in this country. The affordability problem is pervasive in many, many parts of the country. Something like 30% of all Americans are now housing cost burdened by HUD definitions. And addressing affordability and housing costs has become a central policy issue across the country. And if you're following national debates about this, what you are going to hear is zoning, zoning, zoning. That is, zoning reform is the key to solving the affordability problem. What you will hear is that zoning restrictions fundamentally are limiting the supply of new housing across the country, that developers want to build, that home buyers and renters want places to live, and that it's restrictive local zoning and land use regulations that get in the way. In other words, if not for zoning, we would have plenty of housing, and not just housing, we would have dense housing in the urban core, we wouldn't have sprawl, we'd create residential mobility, and we would unlock all of the promise that's locked up today. And in this account, then, the problem of housing affordability is the problem of NIMBY neighbors using zoning as a form of opportunity hoarding to keep newcomers from moving into their neighborhoods. Fundamentally, this focus on zoning is myopic. It's just too narrow. We need to look at a broader set of problems that are producing our affordability crisis and a broader set of solutions. In other words, I think our argument is act like this is an actual crisis and do more than just deregulate land use regulation. And Ganesh is going to talk about specifically the ways that we propose doing that.
Ganesh Sitaraman.
We outline 4 categories that we think are additional areas where one could take a more active approach to thinking about shaping housing markets. First, thinking about modular construction, for example, as a way to reduce the cost. A similar idea that some jurisdictions have picked up on is not construction at the modular or manufactured level, but is pre-approving building patterns and designs so that you don't have to get every possible building approved individually, but there's a kind of default template. Here's one approval. It's always approved as long as you follow this architectural pattern. Policies that can help workforce development, investments in infrastructure, whether that's buses, transit, water, other things, depending on the jurisdiction, depending on the part of the country that you're in. The second category that we talk about in the paper, we call public options for housing. And you may have heard of the public option from debates over healthcare, and a kind of public option for housing in which governments put up the financing. A third category is tax policy. If part of the challenge in some areas is that we have too much, say, undeveloped land, vacant homes, vacant land that people are sitting on, perhaps because they see a rising housing market and want to wait a little longer to build because it'll be worth even more in a few years. One can tax that and say, actually, there's going to be a cost if you're keeping places undeveloped. You can imagine that kind of thing on undeveloped land, on unoccupied houses, on vacancies in rent. And then finally, we talk about what we call market shaping regulations. Some large renters are using algorithmic pricing and creating a wide variety of what people call junk fees, additional fees that are not disclosed at the starting point when they give you the kind of top line how much the rent is going to cost. People could regulate these things, disclosing what the real price is, what all the fees are, banning algorithmic pricing or price collusion. Zoning is another area where we think part of the conversation has been really focused only on the myopic question, as Chris mentioned, about how do we loosen or get rid of zoning rules. But an important thing to understand about zoning is zoning itself is not good or bad. So often what you hear about is that there are rules in different places on minimum lot sizes, and that this is a bad thing because it says you can only have really large lots instead of having multiple houses on a one lot or more dense packed in housing. Another option might be saying we're going to have maximum lot sizes. You can't build in a certain area above a certain amount of lot size, and that would pack in more dense housing.
I've invited Sirkin and Sitaraman to join the show. Fingers crossed, the semester is about to begin so I can understand. If they don't show up, I will do an episode annotating their entire presentation. Stay tuned. August is when you start to see more lanternflies, the beautiful and yet ecologically destructive insect. As an immigrant, I have always felt sad even when I have participated in invasive plant removal efforts in local parks. And the guidance to kill lanternflies on site has disturbed me. Was this necessary? Am I part of the problem? I called Penn State evolutionary biologist and plant hopper expert Julie Urban to get some definitive answers and ended up learning some horticulture and biology.
Where you are in DC and in other major cities and kind of the whole eastern area, we've been promoting like a Stomp It campaign. And so the idea of asking the public to engage us in, killing lanternfly where we can. And so I think that there's a lot of misinterpretation of that. That's not meant to be the control effort. There are, the federal government, USDA APHIS, and states Department of Agriculture are applying insecticide treatments. They're treating Tree of Heaven, one of lanternfly's preferred hosts, with herbicides to try to knock those back. And so with limited resources, though, they're focused on main transportation hubs, airports, where rail lines connect to airports and shipping lines, that kind of thing, truck areas. And so it's not like, well, public, hope your shoes hope you have a good tread on those shoes, have at it. It's more along the lines of, if you don't kill it, you'll carry it. And so the idea that lanternfly is such a good hitchhiker with humans that this is, bringing about awareness. So you're looking for them, but then also making sure that, you do kill them before you get in your car and go out to the beautiful vineyards in Virginia or upstate New York. Basically some areas where we don't have lanternfly yet, and we're trying like crazy to keep it out of there because it could have a much more severe impact than really anything we've seen to date. So it's like the public is helping us buy time for the science to come up with better controls for vineyards and juice grape production along Lake Erie, that type of thing.
Explain where lanternflies come from. Why are they here?
Lanternflies are from Southeast Asia. They're plant hoppers called Fulgoridae. That's the common name of the lanternflies. And that's an area that's what I did my PhD dissertation on. Mostly they're tropically distributed group of 500 species. This one is somewhat of an odd duck. It occupies more temperate regions than most other lanternflies do. Common to other species that I've studied in the tropics it will lay its eggs on anything. An insect lays its eggs and the eggs hatch out. They don't have wings. They have to go through a series of molts, through stages and grow up before they get their wings. And so typically you would put your eggs on a host plant where your offspring can feed. Apparently, lanternflies didn't read the literature, but basically they have a very broad host range. Yes, they like tree of heaven, Ailanthus altissima. It's from its native range, but there's records that they feed on over 100 different species of plants and trees that are found in North America. When it lays its eggs on anything, we mean anything. And so it doesn't have to be a plant or a tree. It can be a rock. We think because of where it showed up and was first reported, close to a stone yard that, had landscaping materials shipped in from all over the world. They're highly camouflaged. They look like a splash of mud. So likely the egg masses were laid on a pallet of rocks, the pallet or the rocks themselves, and that allows them to get transported very, very easily without detection. And so that's this happened in South Korea in the early 2000s. And so USDA APHIS folks were on the lookout for it. But even still, the egg masses got in and were detected, we think, about 2 years later.
So we've had this problem for about 20 years or so.
In the U.S., it was first detected and reported in September in 2014, but subsequent surveys found older egg masses suggesting it was here about 1 to 2 years prior to that. So 2012.
Well, what is the scope of the problem?
So when it first arrived, we had what was reported in South Korea, and that was that it's a sap feeder, so it feeds on phloem, so it's like depleting a plant of its nutrient resources, right? And so the greatest damage was reported to grapevines, but it was also reported to be damaging to apple, peaches, other tree fruit, ornamental trees, timber trees. And so when it showed up in Pennsylvania, it's like, oh man, those are all really important for us. But if you look at dollar amounts, timber is the largest industry in our state of those. What we've learned, yes, lanternfly feeding is a stressor on ornamental trees and on tree fruit, but it doesn't kill them. The trees will recover. It's not as bad as we thought, but it can kill grapevine. Where we are in Pennsylvania and working with New York, you have the Lake Erie Grape Belt along Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York, which is together 32,000 acres of mostly Concord grapes that are juice grapes. And so those growers have a much slimmer profit margin than wine grapes do. They're selling to cooperatives. It gets really hairy and much more complex really, really fast. And so it's not there yet, but it's darn close. And then where you are in DC, it's moving, south, and it's starting to hit the higher value vineyards. I think like the Monticello AVA has some, so it's and same thing at Hudson River Valley and to Long Island.
Is the science recommending remediation?
It's up to the growers, but typically growers have not, like folks we've interacted with, they've found that it's not enough to warrant another spray. And so some of the things that like one tree fruit grower that we work with in Pennsylvania, they have some Ailanthus or tree of heaven in their vineyard. And so they kind of use that as a trap tree and kill them there before they come onto the tree fruit. And they've been able to manage fine.
Are they doing anything else?
But we're doing a 5-year monitoring study of vineyards in Pennsylvania and Virginia. We're doing counts on edges of these vineyards every 2 weeks. We're doing transects throughout. We're recording the presence of Tree of Heaven and where it is. There's a postdoc that has a drone that's flying and mapping Tree of Heaven over the landscape. And so what we're doing in that is looking at how some different biological control agents. So there's a fungus that's been formulated as an insecticide. It's like a safe insecticide. The spores hit the lanternfly and get in there and eat it from the inside out. We've done some studies with that.
I read that there was a wasp predator, which was also invasive.
My money is on that. It's a wasp that'll grapple like second, third instar lanternfly and lay its eggs in the nymphs. And so that's really promising. And like as someone who I've collected plant hoppers from around the world, and this type of parasitoid wasp, when they grow, you can see them in the plant hopper before it kills it as like an outpocketing on its side. And I've seen that a lot. I've seen that a ton in different plant hoppers from around the world. This group of wasps is a very common natural enemy specific to plant hoppers. And so I think they even occur in the fossil record too with plant hoppers. And so I think that this is a really strong case for something that could be effective.
Julie Urban, thank you.
Sure, thank you.
If you are interested in insect biology, stay tuned for my full interview with Penn State entomologist Julie Urban. It should be out in September when Lanternflies are mating. That's all for this episode. Be sure to check out our feature interview series that come out Friday mornings. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities at Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from Howard County, Maryland composer Anna Rubin, who used to teach music at UMBC. The compositions we use in this episode come from her album Povehi. Michal Schmidt on cello and fixed media, and spoken word from Maryland beekeepers Carolyn and Jeff Crooks. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihppod.org. I hope you'll subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.